we're going to unravel the layers of faith woven throughout history. Is America a Christian nation? In April of 2009, President Obama was speaking in Turkey, and he said that America is not a Christian nation. Yet our population and our founding documents have Christian references all through it. We're going to look at the ways in which America could be considered a Christian nation. You won't want to miss this program.
Here's the question of the day, which will be answered at the end of today's program. Did George Washington order his troops to pray?
Is America a Christian nation? Sometimes we hear yes, sometimes we hear no. We're going to look at the 4 ways in which America could not be considered a Christian nation and the 4 ways in which America could indeed be considered a Christian nation. The first way in which it could not be considered is politicians that have a particular agenda. I mentioned in the intro is that President Obama, April 2009, spoke in Turkey. And he made some waves by saying that America is not a Christian nation. We have politicians that have an agenda, from changing the definition of a marriage, politicians wanting to have embryonic stem cell research, where they take a fertilized human baby and do Frankenstein experiments on it. Politicians wanting to promote an agenda to stop prayer in schools. So there are those that want to depart from the tradition. And so in that sense, there is a political agenda in many of the political leaders in America that is definitely against the idea of America being a Christian nation. So that's the first one, is politicians. The second one is the courts. Now we have the ACLU suing all around the country to remove references to God from public places, wanting to take the 10 Commandments down, wanting to forbid prayer in schools. Out in California, there's an effort to remove the cross from the Korean War Memorial in San Diego. A friend of mine is Reese Lloyd, and he has been fighting this effort of the ACLU to strip the references to the Judeo-Christian faith from these veterans memorials. Lawsuits to stop Boy Scouts because their oath says, "Do my duty to God and my country." We see this effort in the courts that is very anti-Christian. So we have certain politicians, we have courts, and then we have public schools. And so more and more, we're seeing public schools move from being Christian to being secular. It's important to understand that the whole history of the public school movement, that when America was started, each colony had their own particular denomination. So Virginia was Anglican, and their university, William and Mary, it was an Anglican university. Massachusetts was Puritan, Congregationalist Puritan, and their university was Harvard and the Boston Latin School. And then you had Princeton, which was a Presbyterian school, and Brown, which was a Baptist school. And so each denomination basically had their own school system. And we began to get immigrants into America, and they would center in the larger cities. And so Boston and New York and Philadelphia began to get lots and lots of immigrants. And so these different denominations decided to start common schools, where they would only teach what they all held in common. So they would just teach the King James Bible, or the Our Father, or the 10 Commandments. What happened, though, is after the Irish potato famine, millions of Irish Catholics began to come to America, and they objected to the fact that in these common public schools, they were teaching the 10 Commandments in the Protestant order versus the Catholic order. It's actually the same content, but they just number them differently. The Catholics have the first 2 more or less combined in reference to the Protestant point of view. I'm the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, and thou shalt not make any graven image. That is one commandment in the Catholic numbering. And then the 10th one is split. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And in the Protestants, that's combined. So, but it's the same content. But when these Catholic immigrants began to come over, there was objection to the common schools. So there was actually a movement to try to secularize the schools, but the Protestants would have nothing of it. And so the Catholics pulled their students out of the public schools because they were too Protestant, and began the parochial Catholic school system in America. Bishop John Hughes in New York City was one of the pioneers of that. And so the public schools in America were thoroughly Protestant up until 1962. They had Bible school curriculums. In my book, America's God and Country, it has a chapter in there on the Dallas Public School textbook in 1947, where it had a class on the Trinity. They would teach the pre-existence of Christ and all the different doctrines. And it was a public high school course in Dallas, Texas, to teach the New Testament. And so public schools were thoroughly Protestant, and there was objection in court cases where a teacher in a public school was a nun, and she was wearing her nun outfit. And so the Protestants brought a lawsuit to try to prohibit her from wearing this Catholic nun's orders outfit, her habit. And so this was the situation. But in 1962 is when there was this effort to try to pull the Bible out of the school and prayer out of the school. A friend of mine is William Murray, and his mother was Madeline Murray O'Hare. And she was the one that used him as the little boy to file the lawsuit on his behalf to get prayer stopped in the public school. Now, Bill Murray, had since become a Christian. And now he has a religious freedom organization trying to get prayer back into the schools. So it's sort of interesting. And he's a great speaker, and you probably would enjoy having him at one of your meetings if you were in a church or with a group. And because he became a Christian, he separated from his mother. And when his mother was murdered, obviously Bill was spared that fate. So anyway, so the public schools in America were thoroughly Protestant up until the 1960s. And so we see that since 1960, there has been this movement to try to remove every vestige of not just Christianity, but God from the public schools, and not just to remove Christianity and God, but once that was removed, that created a vacuum. And into the vacuum was sucked a new religion, a religion of secularism. Now, before you start saying, wait a second, secularism is not a religion, the federal courts in America beg to differ, because in 1960 there was a U.S. Supreme Court case called Torcaso versus the United States, and a person named Torcaso wanted to be a notary in Maryland, but the Maryland state constitution required you to believe in God to hold state office. You had to put your hand on a Bible and say, "So help me God." Well, this atheist refused to do that. He sues. The ACLU took the case and went up to the Supreme Court. And the activist judges on the Supreme Court said he could be a notary. And besides, there are new religions in the United States which do not acknowledge a supreme being. One of them is secular humanism. Now, some say, well, that was in a footnote, so that's not actually part of the decision. Yet, in later Supreme Court decisions, they cited that footnote as an authority, so it is now considered part of the law because it was cited in cases after that. So, we see the Supreme Court in 1970. There was a draft dodger during the Vietnam War named Elliot Welsh, and he wanted to claim religious conscientious objector status as an atheist. And the Army said, no, you're not going to get out that easy. He sues, goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, Elliott versus the U.S., and in 1970, the Supreme Court said atheism is a religion. It says that when somebody holds convictions with the same intent as somebody that holds convictions of a traditional deity, to that person, that is their religion. And so here we have these cases where the Supreme Court is calling atheism a religion. And this is also the case in the public schools. So the public schools, there was a case in the spring of 2009 where a coach was bowing his head while the football players had a voluntary prayer out on the field. And an atheist was offended and brought a lawsuit. And the lawsuit went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court let the decision stand that this coach was not even allowed to bow his head during a voluntary student prayer. And so here we get to the place where schools are becoming, public schools are becoming anti-Christian. So we have the ways in which America recently has moved in the direction of being anti-Christian. One is politicians. Second is the leftist courts. Third is public school system. Now, there are good people in the public school system, and there are people with morals, but as far as a general direction, just like every now and then you have good court decisions and you also have some good politicians, but as far as a movement, we can see this anti-Christian movement originating and going through these different channels of particular politicians with an agenda, particular court cases, the particular areas of public school, and also Hollywood. Now, it's no mystery that Hollywood continues to put out movies that malign traditional values, like marriage being between a man and a woman, and the not sleeping together until after you're married. These principles that used to be part of Hollywood. A friend of mine is Ted Baer. He has the movieguide.org, where they review movies as far as their content being family-friendly or promoting immorality. He brings out an interesting statistic, is that the more faith and family-friendly movies are, the better they do at the box office. And the more triple-rated sex and the mocking Christianity and portraying preachers and priests in a derogatory role, those movies do bad at the box office. And so he's been lobbying movie producers to say, look, if you want to make money, produce movies that are more friendly toward the family and faith. And but anyway, prior to the 1950s and 60s, there was several denominations, the Catholic and then the Baptist, that had movie review boards out there in Hollywood. And every movie that came out, they would review it and decide if it was going to be of a content that would be immoral. And they would either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So the movie producers would try to produce movies that were more aligned with the traditional values of America. And since they were doing such a good job, they decided we're not needed. And so they shut down their operation. But then when that 1960s movement happened, then there began to be this movement there. Now there are other boards. There are, not officially, but those that are inside of the Hollywood circle say that there are groups that review a movie as far as its portrayal of homosexuals. And so they actually have a different type of censorship for the other way. So Hollywood has, other than these faith and family-friendly movies, over the last generation, Hollywood has moved in an anti-Christian direction. Now, I know I've spent a lot of time on that, but those are the four ways in which a very recent move that America could not be considered a Christian nation. We have the particular politicians with an agenda, particular court decisions, also particular public schools, and particular movies and producers in Hollywood. But on the same token, we have four ways in which America could be considered a Christian nation. We're going to get into that in a little more depth, but in basic outline form, they are the population. What are the population? The statistics. How many are Christian and how many are not? The population. The second is the founding documents, the charters for the colonies, the state constitutions. Do they mention Christianity? And if so, what do they say? Then we look at the institutions, like marriage, like equal rights, like everybody getting a vote, like equality, congregational type of church government that was reflected in the voting, and then also the underlying principles of the Constitution. So that's the third, is the documents, the founding documents. And the fourth reason, the fourth way that a country could be considered Christian is the whole idea of tolerance. The whole idea of tolerating people that you don't agree with. that is a Christian idea. And you can look at other countries of the world and other religions of the world. They do not allow that. And so we're going to look into these 4 ways in which a country could be considered Christian in the next segment. So this is a very important point, because every day we hear the talk of, yes, America is a Christian nation, and no, America is not a Christian nation. And so we're going to go over this in detail so you will be able to answer whether or not America is a Christian nation. Most of world's history, power was in the hands of kings and pharaohs and sultans. America did something unique with power in the hands of the people. But are we moving back in the direction of a king? Well, in the book Change to Chains, we see the 6,000-year quest for control and where we fit in the picture. A fascinating book that you will want to get.
To receive your copy of Change to Chains, send your love gift of $25 or more to the address on the screen.
We guard against the forces of anti-Christian aggression was in the speech that Franklin Roosevelt gave at Madison Square Garden in 1940. This is in a book I wrote, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States. And I contrast all of the quotes that refer to America as a Christian nation. Here's a quote from Franklin Roosevelt in 1941. Preservation of these rights is vitally important, not only to us who enjoy them, but to the whole future of Christian civilization. Here's FDR, Democrat president, elected 4 times as president, saying that we wanted to preserve Christian civilization. Here's a quote that Franklin Roosevelt gave on July 19th, 1940. We face one of the greatest choices in history, the continuation of civilization as we know it versus the ultimate destruction of all that we have held dear, religion against godlessness. Is America a Christian nation? We're going to look at this in some more depth, and it's fascinating when the further you go back in history, the more you see some evidence that maybe, in fact, it is. I wrote a book entitled Backfired, A Nation Born for Religious Tolerance No Longer Tolerates Religion. And in this book, I look at the statistics, the population of America. Now, it's interesting, I mentioned the 4 ways in which a country could not be considered Christian: particular politicians, particular court decisions, particular public school policies, and the media. But the 4 ways in which a country could be considered Christian is the population, the founding documents, the institutions, and the whole idea of tolerating people that you don't believe in. It's the idea that Christianity has that true religion is from the inside out, not required by the government from the outside in. But we'll get into that in a minute. Let's first look at population. Now, one of the sources that I used in my research is the CIA's website. That's right, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. And their website is cia.gov, so you can check out what I'm saying. There's a link on there called the World Fact Book, and it lists every nation in the world and every imaginable statistic you want to know about that nation. And so it lists Israel, and it lists the amount of arable land, gross national product, infant mortality rate, ethnicity, and religion. And it says about 80% of the country is Jewish. Then you can look at Japan. It lists all the different statistics, and then it has religion, around 82% Buddhists. And then you look at India, and you look at the percentage of Hindus. Well, then you look at Greece, and it says it's about 95% Eastern Orthodox. Poland, about 95% Roman Catholic. Pakistan, about 95% Islamic. Of course, Saudi Arabia is 100% Muslim. That's because it's the death penalty if you're anything but. Well, what does it say about America? What does the CIA.gov website say about the religion in America? Well, you look at it, and about 10 years ago, it said that America was 84% Christian. And just recently, it's been revised to say that America is around 78% Christian. And that works out to about 52% Protestant, the largest Protestant denomination being the Baptist, and 52% Protestant and about 25% Catholic. And about 2% would be other Christian denominations like Eastern Orthodox and so forth. 2% of Americans are Mormon, 2% Jewish, 0.5% Hindu, 0.5% Buddhist, 1% Muslim, and only around 1% atheist. This is an interesting statistic, that here you have a government website saying that only about 1% of Americans identify themselves as atheists, where around 80% identify themselves as Christian. What do you call it when 1% forces its will down the throat of 80%? I think it's called a tyranny. It may as well be the King of England forcing everybody to be Anglican, or the United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, forcing everybody to be atheists. And as I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court of the United States has called atheism a religion. It's actually been the most violent religion in world history. More people have died because of atheism, the religion of atheism, than all other religious wars combined. The 80 million killed by the atheist communist regime of Mao Zedong with his Cultural Revolution in the 1950s. Stalin killing 25 million Ukrainians in the Soviet Union. About 60 million altogether were killed in the Soviet Union in their purges over the decades. And then Pol Pot in Cambodia, and Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, and Castro in Cuba, and the communists invading Hungary, and all these different countries killed. It goes all the way back to the French Revolution with Robespierre, and 40,000 people, heads cut off with the guillotine during their atheistic French Revolution. France was so atheistic that they wanted to get rid of the calendar. And instead of having it say at the bottom, done in the year of our Lord, people say, well, the U.S. Constitution does not mention God anywhere. It's like, hello, it says done in the year of our Lord, 1787. Well, that was our Constitution. In France, they were atheistic. They made 1793 the new year one. And they wanted to change the month from 7 days a week to 10 days. And that way they could get rid of the Sabbath, because that had Judeo-Christian connotations and so forth. So we look at this movement of atheism and the number of people that have been killed throughout history. Well, today only 1% of Americans are atheists, yet they are forcing their views, their religion, down on everybody else, whereas the majority of the people in America hold belief in Christian views, and 92 to 94% of Americans believe in God. So here you have 1% forcing its will on 92% that believe in God. So we see that America's transition from a democratic constitutional republic to a tyranny. But nevertheless, here's the CIA's website. This is a government website saying the majority of Americans are Christian. Now, I have a degree in accounting from St. Louis U, and if the population of America, according to the government website, is 78%, I think 78% is a majority. If you owned 78% of a sports team, you would be the owner. If you own 78% of the stock in a company, you are the owner. I mean, all you need is 51%, and you can make all the decisions of that company. So 78% is well above that 51%. And so we see that population-wise, America could indeed be called a Christian nation. If 95% of Pakistan is Islamic, they can call themselves the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Well, if 80% of Americans are Christian, America could be called correctly a Christian nation. We're going to get into a couple of the other ways. You're going to want to stay tuned.
Here's the answer to today's question. Did George Washington order his troops to pray? On May 2nd, 1778, General George Washington ordered, quote, "The Commander-in-Chief directs that the divine service be performed every Sunday at 11 o'clock. It is expected that officers of all ranks will, by their attendance, set an example for their men. While we are zealously performing the duties of good citizens and soldiers, we certainly ought not to be inattentive of the higher duties of religion. To the distinguished character of patriot, It should be our highest glory to laud the more distinguished character of Christian. The signal instances of providential goodness which we have experienced demand from us in a peculiar manner the warmest returns of gratitude in the supreme author of all good." Unquote. When France entered the war on America's side, General Washington ordered May 5, 1778, quote, "It having pleased the almighty ruler of the universe to defend the cause of the United American States, and finally by raising up a powerful friend among the princes of the earth, it becomes us to set apart a day for gratefully acknowledging the divine goodness." Unquote.
Is America a Christian nation? We've been talking about the 4 ways in which a country could not be considered Christian. And in America, it's politicians with a particular agenda, particular court decisions, public schools, and the Hollywood media. But the way it can be considered Christian are the population, is 80% Christian on the whole, the founding documents, the basis of our institutions, and the whole idea of tolerance. But let's look at another poll. The City University of New York does a study periodically called ARIS. It's the American Religious Identification Survey. And in 2001, this is the report that they had. It said that the population of the United States is 76.5% Christian. Now, that's still a majority. It's gone down. If you go back 10 years, it was higher, but it's still 76.5 according to this ARISA poll. This breaks down to 52% Protestant, 24.5% Catholic, 13.2% secular, and they did specify that some immigrants from other countries chose this category because in other countries they were persecuted for their faith, and when the surveyor called and asked what religion they were like, I don't know if I want to tell anybody because I just came from a country that I was persecuted for. Anyway, they chose to put down 13.2% secular, 1.3% Jews, Muslims 0.5, Buddhists 0.5, agnostics 0.4, atheists 0.4, I'll repeat that again, atheists 0.4, 0.4, and then it goes on to the Hindus were 0.3, Unitarians and Universalists were 0.1, 0.1%, Wiccan, Pagan, Druid, and so forth, in even smaller percentages. But nevertheless, this is all in the book Backfired, which you can get through TCT. So here, again, we have a very legitimate poll saying that 76.5% of Americans are Christian, and that works out to about 52% Protestant and 25% Catholic, and so forth. So get the book, read the statistics, and get them all down, or you can go to the CIA.gov website and pull them down. Why is this important? Because Christians are a majority in America. If you were to watch the news media, you would get the impression that Christians are this fringe minority. But in fact, the majority of the population of the United States of America is thoroughly Christian. This is important to understand when we watch those that are attacking the Christian faith. This is an exciting study. We're going to get into it more in the next section, and look forward to having you back.
This has been a TCT Network exclusive production. If you would like to see more exclusive special programs, send your support to TCT, P.O. Box 1010, Marion, Illinois, 62959.